Hello and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire. Thank you for coming back for another video, and I hope you're having a good week. Today I am sharing techniques for combining masking and stenciling. Stencils are inexpensive and can be used in many creative ways, and I'll link to some other stencil videos at the end of this one to check out. But today I am creating one-layer backgrounds using masks and stencils together. There are many fun techniques you can do, and I'll share several today. And Lila even created one of the cards, so I think you'll like that one. Okay, let's start with this example here. For this one, we're going to do some masking and stenciling, and also lots of inking. This card features the new Altenew Elegant Swirls stencil. I'm also using these dies from Altenew. It's the Altenew Halftone Hearts die set. Now these actually coordinate with the Halftone Hearts stamp set, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Or they can be used separately, and I'll be using the largest heart from this one. You could use any shape die for this technique. For this particular one, I think the larger the die, the better. Okay, next I'm using Avery removable ID labels. These are removable adhesive sheets, and they are perfect for masking. You can use any masking paper that you may have. I really like this because it's inexpensive. It has the right amount of tack for it, and I find I'm able to reuse the pieces often. This is an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and I'm just going to trim it down to 5.5 by 4.25, so I'll get 4 pieces out of one sheet. If you do not have any type of masking paper, you can use like typing or thin copy paper and use that as a mask and temporarily adhere it in place. But I do find it very handy to have masking paper like this. From that masking paper piece, I'm going to die cut that large heart die. So I'll just tape it in place, and you can run it through any die cut machine. I'm taking the negative of this and placing it onto a 4.25 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock. Any white cardstock should work, but I do recommend a high quality because high quality cardstock always inks better than low quality. So right now we only have that heart exposed. First, I want to apply a very thin, light layer of color. When I like to apply quick, light layers of color, I like to use stencil brushes. Lately, I've been using the Holtz Distress blending brushes as they're very handy, and they even have a lid to protect the bristles. You can use these with pretty much any ink. Works very well with Altenew dye inks, also works great with distress inks. Now for this particular card, I'm just going back and forth in kind of a swiping motion just to put a rainbow of color down. To get good blending, all you need to do is overlap each color, and it'll blend beautifully. And you'll see how easy you can achieve a light layer of color. You could also use any other inking tool and just be sure to have a light hand when applying it, but using the brushes makes it easy. You can put more color down with the brushes if you want to by applying more and more, and you can build it up. But I find the brushes best for the light application. Okay, once I've put down that light layer of color, it's time to add the stencil on top, and then we'll add a heavier layer of the same colors. So I'm just kind of picking out a spot of the stencil that I like. I'm using purple tape to tape this in place. You can use any masking tape. The reason I like the Therm purple tape in particular is I find that the tack on it is perfect for crafting. It doesn't rip my paper, and it holds up nicely, and I can reuse these pieces over and over. So here I am applying a heavier layer of the same colors. This time I'm using an ink blending tool because it's faster to apply a heavier layer of color with the ink blending tool than with a blending brush. I'm making sure once again to overlap the colors, and I kind of use the side of the ink blending tool sponge so that I only apply a narrow line of color. Okay, once I've applied that heavy layer of color, I'm going to remove my stencil, and you can see the beautiful color that you end up with. Now at this point I decided I wanted to add a little shimmer, so I'm lining the stencil back in place, and I'm going to apply a few sprays of Tsukineko Shimmer Spritz. This is my favorite shimmer spritz. You want to spray it from about 2 feet above, as much as you want, and it'll give a beautiful sparkle. I can remove my mask and save it for another project if I'd like to, and then I'm heat setting that spritz just so we don't mess it up as we continue. I did trim this down to 4 by 5 1/4, and I have a piece of craft foam cut slightly smaller than that. I'm using Gina Connect Adhesive to glue that craft foam to the back of our inked panel, and then I'll add that onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding note card. That craft foam between will give us a nice even raised dimension. Next, I have die cut 3 Love die cuts from the Altenew Script Word dies, and I glued them on top of each other for a nice stacked look. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of those and putting it right in the heart. I also created a little sentiment strip where I stamped a sentiment and cut it very small on cardstock. Here I'm cutting a piece of craft foam to go behind it so it has dimension too. But instead of just sticking this onto my card, one trick that I like to do is to put liquid adhesive on that craft foam. Seems kind of silly, but the reason is you can now move it on your card. Liquid adhesive allows you to kind of shift things around. And watch, I'm going to use my T-ruler to make sure I get it down straight. So I'll place it down there. Then I decide I wanted to move it over to the side a bit, and I can just slide it because we have that liquid adhesive there. And it'll dry and still have that nice dimension. For each of my cards today, I did use the coordinating stencil to decorate the flap. So I put a piece of scrap paper underneath the flap, tape the stencil in place, and just quickly apply color any way you want. I found the ink blending tool to be the fastest, so that's what I'm using here. And there we have an envelope that perfectly matches our card. So this card is really quite simple, and the fun thing is that you could make another card that's reverse, where the area inside the heart is white and the color is around it, by using the heart mask that we ended up not using on this card. I also added a few Lucy's Cards gems, just for a little bit of shine. And this is where the sentiment is from. It's the Altenew Halftone Heart Stamp Set. This is the one that coordinates with the die that I used on this card. Okay, my next example steps it up just a little bit. This time I'm using a die that I found that coordinates with a stamp set. So I have this Altenew Golden Feather stamp set, and I noticed that the dies that coordinate with this would be perfect to create a mask from, since they're large and they have a distinguished shape. So I'm using the 1 feather die that you see there, and also the new Altenew Spring Garden stencil. I'm temporarily taping the feather die on the center of a piece of masking paper. Run it through my die cut machine, and then I end up with a feather mask and the negative space of the feather. I'm lining up the negative space onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of white cardstock. I'm just holding it there long enough to place the feather mask in the center. This is just helping me to get that feather mask nicely placed in the center of my panel. Next, I'm taking that new Altenew stencil, taping it to the back of the stencil, and now I'm going to quickly apply a thin layer of color. Nothing heavy, just a very light bit of color. By the way, these Distress blending brushes fit very nicely in the Distress ink cube tins that Tim Holtz has available. So you could just have one brush for each color family, and then you can just reach for them very quickly and they can be stored together. So once I kind of have an even layer of color, I remove the stencil, and there you can see the background with the mask in the center. Now I'm taking the negative space mask, lining it up around the feather mask in the center, so just to help me position it just right, and then I'll press that mask down. Then I can remove the feather mask. So now we're going to ink inside of the feather area, but this time I'm going to apply more color so this area stands out. So again, I'm starting with a light layer of color, and I'll go back and forth here, applying a few different blue and green Altenew inks. Now you can stipple with this, like bounce the brush up and down on the paper, or you can go back and forth like I am. There are many ways to use it, and they each give kind of different results. Once I have this light layer of color, I'm taking the stencil and I'll line it back up. The nice thing is I can see through my negative space mask and make sure that I line up the stencil with the inking that's already in the background. Once I have it lined up, I'll tape the stencil down with some more tape. I'm reusing all those pieces. And I'll apply a heavier layer of color, the same exact ink colors, in the same areas, but this time with an ink blending tool and a heavy hand. Once I have all the color applied, I can remove the stencil. Then I can remove all of the masks. Again, if you're careful, you can remove the mask and save it for another project. Even if you tear it, it's okay. You can just line it up again. This particular technique is excellent for one layer card because that pattern continues from the background to that center area. So it's got a continuous look. All I did was add that on to a note card, and I stamped a sentiment in the center that says birds of a feather flock together, and that's from this Altenew Birds of a Feather stamp set. I also added a few gems, but you could definitely have kept this card a one-layer card if you wanted to. By the way, this stamp set has a lot of great sentiments in it, and I'll link to a video where I used this one before. Okay, next I have another card that has a very similar technique. However, we step it up a little bit by adding heat embossing. For this one, I'm using the Altenew Halftone Stars dies. Again, these Halftone Stars dies have a stamp set that it coordinates with, which I'll show you a little bit later. And I use the largest star from that set. I'm also using the Altenew Molded Line Stencil. Here I am die cutting the star from the center of a piece of masking paper, and then we will have a star mask and the negative space mask. I'm holding the negative space mask onto a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock, and then I will place the star mask in the center. So I'm just holding the negative space there to help me position it perfectly in the center. Okay, so first I'm going to apply a very light layer of blue ink in the background, again using the Distress blending brush so I can have a very light bit of color. Once I'm happy with that, I can place the stencil onto the card, and we will add some more of the same color, this time with a slightly heavier hand. I don't want this to be super dark because I want the focus to be on the star, not the background. So although I'm using an ink blending tool, I'm doing a very light hand. This shows you can use the ink blending tool for any inking that you want. Okay, once I'm happy with that, I can remove the stencil. Then we can remove the star from the center. Now we'll take the negative space and line that up with the star, and this will allow us to ink in the center of the star. This time I'll apply a heavier amount of a darker blue ink so that the focus is on the star. For the first layer, I'm just doing a light bit of the darker blue ink with an ink blending tool. Then I will line the stencil back up. However, this time I can't see through my masking paper to line up the stencil, and I didn't plan for this. So I'm tearing my mask in the corners just so I can see some of the pattern in the background so that I can line it up. I could have planned better so I didn't have to tear the mask, but I didn't, so I'm just kind of going with it, lining up the stencil with the inking in the background, taping it down, and now I'll apply a heavier layer of the blue ink to the center of the star. So I used a lighter amount of ink and a lighter ink on the background, and a heavier amount of a darker ink in the center of the star. Once I finish that up, I can go ahead and remove the stencil and remove all of the masks. Next, it's time to heat emboss, so I'm using my anti-static powder tool first. Then I'm taking the release paper of the mask. Just that was sitting right there. I tore my mask, so I had to use this. Just laid it down, held it in place around the star, and I applied Versamark ink to the star area. This way, I will end up with a nice, crisp heat embossed image because that Versamark ink is only on the star. I added some Altenew translucent pearl embossing powder. This is a clear, sparkly embossing powder. Warming up my heat gun, and then I will heat set that powder, and we'll end up with like a glittery shine to that star. But that stencil pattern continues along the background too, so it really gives a fun look. I trimmed that panel down a bit and added it to a navy 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. And then I added a few little glitter stars to the background. These are from the Tonic Golden Years Confetti. I've been using these a lot lately because there are a few included in the set, but these stars really catch the light nicely. Also, for the sentiment, I used the Altenew Halftone Stars stamp set to create the little sentiment strip. This is the set that coordinates with the die that I used. And the hello I used from the Altenew alphabet die set. This is a great die set. It's small, so it's inexpensive. And I cut 3 of each letter, glued them on top of each other so there's dimension, and added that to my card. Okay, time for another masking and stencil technique. This time I'm using pigment ink for a really cool effect. This is the Feeling Dotty stencil from Altenew. This is a great polka dot stencil. I'm using a distress blending brush to apply a light amount of light green ink onto a piece of white cardstock. So I'm going very light-handed here. After I finish that, I'll clean my stencil off very well, and I'll heat set that background just to make sure that ink is dry. Next, I'm taking the clean stencil, lining the dots back up, and I'll tape that in place. And this time, I'm very generously applying white pigment ink, and I'm using an ink blending tool for this. So this white, thick ink will only allow a little bit of that light green ink to show through. So I'll end up with light dots all over the background. And the white pigment ink will give us a cool effect when we move on to our next step. Be sure to heat set this. You want that pigment ink to be dry and not have any more shine to it. Next, I'm using this die that coordinates with the Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set. I've used this one before. I'm die cutting that large leaf die from the center of a piece of masking paper, just as I have done before. I'm taking the negative space of that mask and positioning it onto our dotted background. There are a few little bits and pieces that I need to include with the mask. You can see in between some of the leaves. So I'm just temporarily holding the leaf mask in the center and adding these tiny little bits and pieces into the openings. Once I've done that, I can remove the leaf mask, and now we just have the outline. Next, I'm using an ink blending tool and a few different shades of green Altenew ink to color in that open leaf area. I'm putting mostly lighter color to the edges and darker color to the center. Notice that the white pigment ink dots somewhat resist this ink that we're putting on top. That's why I use the white pigment ink. Next, we can remove that negative space mask, reuse it if we want to. Also remove those tiny little bits in the center. And we're left with this solid green looking leaf with soft dots. And the dot pattern continues all across the card. I added a couple sentiment strips to the center and put this on a green note card along with a few pearls. Check out those dots. The continuous look is really fun. You could do this with any stencil, but that dot pattern is really great. Those sentiments are from that Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set that die coordinates with. I've used this one for a different card in another video, and I'll link to that here if you're looking for more ideas. Okay, my next card was really fun to make, and I plan to make some more. This time I did basic masking with masking tape instead of with masking paper. So I have the Altenew Aztec Motif stencil. This is a really fun one, and some white cardstock. I'm lining the stencil up on the cardstock. Now this time I'm not die cutting any masking paper. Instead, I'm just using my purple tape to mask off areas so I can ink it with different colors. Now this purple tape is great because you can move it and reuse it many times. The pieces that I've used in this video I've used over and over. And you can use a baby wipe or a wet cloth or a dry cloth to wipe ink off of the tape so that you can reuse it over and over for masking and inking techniques. Now you can do this with other masking tapes also, so use what you have. I just like this purple tape because I like the width of it, the fact that it holds up nicely, and the tack is just the right amount for the crafting that we do. I don't want to worry about tearing my paper, so this is very handy to have. So after I inked up the entire background, I trimmed it down and added it to a black note card. I also added some gems into the pattern, so you can see in the background I have little gems just to add some sparkle. I die cut the word "You Rock" using that simple alpha die set that I used earlier, and I covered the letters with Tonic crystal glaze so that when it dries it has a nice shine to it. So you can see I also made a coordinating envelope by inking in the same way, so they match perfectly. This card didn't take very long at all, and I think the colors are really fun. And here you can see the nice shine that you get with the gems in the background and the Tonic crystal glaze on the letters. Now this last card is definitely my favorite because it was a collaboration with my 6-year-old daughter Lila, who loves to craft. So I did this first part. I used some of the purple tape to do the masking. In this case, I just put tape around the edges about a 1/2 inch in so that I had a masked area in the center. So I just have this open rectangle. I'm taping down the Altenew Flowing Drops stencil, and once I have a tape there, I'm simply going to trace the pattern with a black pen. Very easy to do, very fast. And I also use the black pen to trace along the masked lines, so I have like a rectangle frame that I create too. So we'll just have this area of outline pattern that Lila can color. So I removed the masks, I gave it to Lila. She spent the afternoon coloring it. She spent so much time on it. She wanted to show it in the video. However, she went roller skating with her dad. So I was left to finish it off. All I did was trim it down and add it to a note card. And then I added the word hi with the Altenew alphabet die set. And I covered that with some Tonic crystal glaze. So you can see she did some really cool artsy coloring with her Copic markers, and I thought this card was super inspiring, and I hope you like it too. Okay, there you have lots of ways to use your stencils along with masking to create really cool cards. A lot of these techniques would be great for 1-layer cards too. In the middle, I have a couple other videos you might like. I link all of the supplies that I use down in that YouTube description below. I appreciate you spending time with me this long 21-minute video. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.